Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Easy Conversations, a podcast about having easy conversations. I'm your host for Candandia. In this week's episode, I sit down with my new friend Maruva and we talk about topics such as existential crisis, living in fear, and self love. Maruva shares his own story of not being able to be himself and the turmoil that caused in his life, and how over the past couple of years he's been able to find this newfound love for himself and how it's changed his life. I hope you can get a lot from this episode because I sure did. If at the end you leave a review, I would really appreciate it. Maruva, thanks for joining the podcast today. I appreciate you taking the time and super grateful for you reaching out to me. And then just for the listeners, you and I connected over Instagram. It feels like I connect with a lot of my guests over Instagram, and I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of cool people, including yourself. But yeah, before we get started, I kind of want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself a little bit, just to kind of put into context, your story, and then we'll get into some of the topics we've wanted to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here as well. And yeah, Instagram, I agree. Instagram is such a great place to connect with people.
Yeah.
But my name is Maruva, which is short form for Maruva, which in full means flowers of the word in my language, Shona, which
Oh,
hails from Zimbabwe. It's the official language of Zimbabwe. By day, I am a small business advisor, and then by night, I am a podcaster, aspiring writer, public speaker, LGBTQIA plus activist, brother, cousin,
nice.
Beyonce fan.
Yeah, well, who isn't a Beyonce fan? But it sounds like you've got a lot of things on the go, and it seems like you're doing a lot of work in a lot of good causes. So that's amazing. And
Mhm.
um, so maybe explain like where the whole um, motivation of being an activist, especially as you mentioned the LGBTQ plus community, where what has motivated you to be an activist in that space?
Well, first and foremost, I am a gay man. Identify as a gay man.
Hmm.
And I always got frustrated because when you look at the public sphere with all the LGBTQIA plus icons that we have, first of all, most of them are Caucasian, right?
Hmm.
That's just the fact that most of the icons now it's changing. We're
Hmm.
seeing more people of color coming up to the platform to offer their narratives. But I was so frustrated that when I looked at all of them, I wasn't seeing a lot of representation for African born, African raised Black men.
Hmm.
And even now, I don't really see it. There's just few and far in between. So that's what motivated me to sort of come forth and start talking about my story and my journey. Because I wanted someone else out there, whether it's in my home country, Zimbabwe, or any other place in Africa, really, to look at my story and say, hey, I get to do this too. I get to fight for myself. I get
Hmm.
to believe that I'm worthy, that everyone else around me is wrong, right?
Hmm.
So that's part of the primary reason why, because I want to be part of the group that's creating more visibility for gay African men. That's
Yeah.
where it comes from.
No,
Yeah.
and that's amazing. And I think one of the important things you touched on is being worthy, because we often talk about from a human rights perspective, and especially like coming to Canada, there's that whole concept of being accepted as a
Mm,
foreigner or an outsider. But we don't really look at it from the perspective of someone that may be gay or bisexual or lesbian. Like from that community, we don't look at it from that perspective, right? So I'm glad you
mm.
mentioned that. Um, and without like, so, I don't have a lot of knowledge, but is it something that's openly accepted in Africa?
I can't, I wouldn't want to speak for any other African nations.
Yeah.
It's such a large continent, but in
Yeah.
my home country, Zimbabwe, it's not accepted. It's criminalized
Hmm.
by our constitution as well as the criminal code. They don't condone any sort of same sex or even, as you know, under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella, it's not just gays and lesbians, it's bisexual, it's
Hmm.
intersexuality, trans,
Yes.
etc. It's not condoned at all. And there's this pretense which bugs me. This pretense that um, people in that community don't exist. I think I heard someone saying on another podcast that there's this notion that we're living on some island somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
that's some remote island, and it's not true. We're part of the community. We're everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's what it is in Zimbabwe, and nobody wants to talk about it. People
Yeah.
know about it, but
Yeah.
nobody wants to have the conversation about it and say, this is it, this is what's happening, this is real.
Yeah.
We can't just pretend that it's not here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Of course.
it's awful. It's like the law doesn't want you to exist, and your family doesn't want you to exist. Your friend doesn't want you to exist either. So it's
Right.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it's for most people, it's easier to avoid rather than face the topic, right? If they can avoid it and
Yeah.
just not cause any trouble, then like it's like let's avoid ruffling feathers, right? So
Yeah.
so I can
Yeah.
imagine that must be really frustrating. And I feel like a lot of countries in the world, I don't know if it's whether it's lack of awareness or lack of people taking initiative. There's other influences too, but it is a problem across the world. But
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things you mentioned, it's as a man of color and being gay, it's only become more prominent recently. So
Mm-hmm.
so I guess, from that perspective, like some of the things I've been reading in psychology is the whole mental health challenges that come with being marginalized. And in your case,
Mm-hmm.
it's you're gay and you're also colored. So there's that marginalization that comes from both angles. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to understand, like, I know we've touched on it briefly, but I guess to get into it a bit deeper, did you experience that?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm still healing from it. I'm still healing from it, doing therapy, which is helping me a lot. But as I was saying earlier, it's that idea that every single person around you doesn't want you to exist.
Mm-hmm.
So you start believing that. You start believing that maybe I shouldn't exist, which is where that suicidal ideation comes from,
Right.
right? The idea that, okay, so I have no place in this society, then what's the point of me being here?
Mm-hmm.
According to the Bible that I'm reading at church, I'm an abomination. According to my grandmother or my father, I'm not man enough to carry the family name.
Mm-hmm.
According to my friend, I'm an embarrassment to his other peers when I'm talking about certain things. So it's all those forces coming together and just suffocating you and preventing you from self actualizing properly. It's very, very, very hard because it becomes difficult for you to have a space to develop that self love language, right? So that's what I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing is when I started really living through it, which is around when I recognized that I was in pain, but didn't really understand what kind of pain this was. I was 13. That's
Mm-hmm.
when I really started kind of understanding. I think everybody around 12 or 13, you start seeing the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
You're rationalizing things around you. So that's when I started really realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm carrying a death wish, right? I don't want to be here. So I suffered with that for such a long time, 17 years in total. I just, I ignored that this pain was there. And I always tried to find something to distract myself, whether it was my alcohol addiction
Mm-hmm.
or when I had my drug phase
Mm-hmm.
or when I was fucking everybody around the block,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
literally. There was always something within those 17 years that I was doing to distract me from the fact that I was suffering. Um, but in saying that, I realized how lucky I am because right around that time, that's when my family and I relocated to North America.
Mm-hmm.
So at least I got the opportunity to go to a place where I had the option to actually be free, given the strides that North American society has have made in terms of LGBTQIA plus rights. But then it breaks my heart because people in my country that are there right now don't have that space yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take a very, very, very long time for them to have that space to properly heal as I am healing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sorry, it's just
No,
I
hey,
just um, and it's part of why going back to your other question, why I want to dedicate myself to this type of activism, not just only promoting the rights, but also just the mental health aspect of it, the resilience aspect of it, right? So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, you know,
I know this must be really tough, so I appreciate you sharing all of this, and I can feel your emotions too. So,
yeah.
I think this is obviously a very sensitive topic, and I can't even imagine the uh the challenges you must have faced. And when you describe the people that are still back home who are probably fighting this battle day in and day out, like my heart goes out to them, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I can't even imagine not being able to be myself and
Mm-hmm.
pretending to be someone else. And you described it, right? Like like I think when you do go through an existential crisis, you almost try to numb that pain because it is a suffering. And
It is.
you described it through whether it was alcohol addiction or drugs. Like there's many forms of numbing the pain.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did it for you come to a like the realization that like you don't want to suffer anymore? And as you've described, you're going through that healing process and therapy. But what was that moment for you where you were like, okay, I can't live like this, or if I continue to do this, I won't be living.
2018, fall of 2018, I was sitting on top of a mental breakdown that kept growing and growing over days, over weeks, over months. And I specifically have this memory of me going into an elevator when I was going to work in the morning, and I stepped into the elevator, and now that I look back, I realized that I was having a panic attack, like a
Hmm.
legitimate panic attack. I couldn't breathe properly. So I'm in the elevator, and my HR manager walks in. We had a very good relationship. She was actually grooming me to be a leader of the like at one of the departments of the company at the time.
Hmm.
But she walks in, and then she just looks at me. She's like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" Right? So I'm having this panic attack, and then a couple of days after that incident, my supervisor just comes to my desk and she says, "Can you come to a meeting with me?" And then I said, "Okay." I thought it was a performance thing because
Hmm.
my job, I had started tanking. I didn't care about what I was doing. I was finding shortcuts everywhere. I was behind doing everything. It was just awful. So I thought it was just another performance review just to tell me how badly I was doing. So I
Hmm.
go into the meeting, I walk in, and then my HR manager is sitting there, and she just says, "You need to go home. You need to take a break. You're not well." I was so defensive about it when she said it because,
Hmm.
in my head, I was like, I got this. I can do this. I was riding this high that I'm on top of everything.
Yeah.
I'm a big shot. I'm working for a Fortune 500 corporate company. I got these fancy suits. Look at my Instagram. All that
Yeah.
bullshit, that millennial nonsense that we
Yeah.
feed into. So I was so defensive. I was like, what do you mean? I don't need anything. And then she just kept insisting, you're not well. You need to take a break. And I don't know how she did it, but she broke the fourth wall with me. And I just started crying in that office. And I kid you not, she took the phone that was in front of me and then she pushed it in my face and she says, call your doctor. I need you to call your doctor. And I was so embarrassed because I didn't even have a family doctor.
Hmm.
So I started crying even more.
Hmm.
I was like, my God, I don't even have a doctor to take care of my health. I was so humiliated. You have no idea. Even as I say this right now, I can feel the humiliation.
Hmm.
So that's when my other supervisor just walked out and then they brought back my things. And then that's when I went on a mental disability break for about 3 to 4 months. That's when I had the silence that I needed to realize that I was in danger.
Hmm. Hmm.
That's when I had the silence that I needed to articulate the fact that I was struggling with suicidal depression and say the words. I'm suicidal. I have thoughts about killing myself and say them as much as I can to be comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
That period, that's when it all happened, 2018. And then my mother came to my rescue. Love her so much.
Mm-hmm.
She came to my rescue, and that's when she started teaching me that self love language. She first said, I want to introduce you to your mentor, and his name is Nelson Mandela.
Mm-hmm.
So I started reading his book, A Long Walk to Freedom. And then she came back. She was like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's just do things from the basics. I want you to eat well. I want you to be excited about, what you're cooking, whatever it is that you're doing, just slow down. And she said, what you're doing right now is not about you getting good at it. This is not something that you have to conquer because she knows that I'm ambitious and competitive. She said, no, this is for you. So that's
Mm-hmm.
when, like I said, that silence gave you the opportunity um, to start living the right way. So I
Mm-hmm.
was literally shocked. It wasn't me realizing, oh, I need to do better. It was somebody else noticing that I was crashing or I had already crashed. I was
Yeah.
splattered on the floor. And she's like, you need to get up. You need to rise. Right. So 2018, I started the work and now here we are.
No, that's an amazing
Yeah.
story, and it's pretty cool that your mom was the one who came and she was able to guide you in that
Yeah.
direction.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, that's amazing. Like I'm lost for words, and um, I guess um, I guess when you mention like some of the thoughts around suicide, like at any point were you worried you were going to act on it, or was there even like a trigger in your head that, oh, like this is bad, or like what was it like going through that kind of phase in your life?
It's terrifying because you can't hide from it. I'll just give you a specific example. I'd be standing on the edge of a railway, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, what if I just jump right now? It'll be all over just quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be even just like cooking my meals, and I'm like, what if I just turn this knife this way and just run into it? What would happen? I'm in the shower, just having a shower, and I'm looking at my taps. I'm like, what if I just bang my head in my taps? Or even in the mirror, what if I just bang my head on the mirror?
Mm-hmm.
What if I took this whole bottle of pills? I'm looking outside my window because I used to live on the 21st floor. I'm like, what if I just jumped out of this window? That's how my mind was working
Mm-hmm.
every single time, every day, almost every hour. But then I would always laugh because that's how I deal with pain. First of all, I laugh. I try to find humor in it. I remember thinking, wow, like I'm way too narcissistic to really go through with it. So I, so I'll get a moment where I'm like, yes, fucking do it, just do it. You're worthless. You're a piece of shit. Just get it done with. And then I'd snap out of it. I'm like, wait, no, I'm too fly for this. I'd say something like that in my head, just to help me snap out of it. That
Yeah.
really helped me. Um, and Nelson Mandela's tale, like his whole story, I really subscribe to that as well because I used to look at his 27 years locked up in that box. I mean, I can't compare it to
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that he went through, but for me, I used to look at that kind of confinement as the same as what I was dealing with as well. So reading his words helped me snap out of it, but that's how my mind was working
Mm-hmm.
every single time, every
Yeah.
single time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and metaphorically, I get it too, right? Like, you felt confined, you felt prisoned,
Hmm. Yes.
because you just couldn't be yourself, or you didn't feel safe to be yourself. So
Yeah.
you were locked up in a way,
Hmm.
and you were
Hmm.
looking for freedom. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
guess, with like, so you've mentioned therapy and all of that. Like, what's your journey been since like the that late 2018, and your mom coming and supporting you and kind of guiding you from there on? Like, how have you been able to uh, keep keep that same mindset and continue on that journey of self-love, and how's therapy been helping you?
Well, the one thing is I'm consistent with the basics. When I talk about the basics, I'm talking about maintaining, a good diet, exercise, etc., which is really important. Some people they understate how important. I heard it even in your podcast,
Hmm.
Challenge Thoughts.
Yeah.
The author of that book was talking about the same thing,
Hmm.
getting back to the basics. I think she actually used the same phrase, if I
Yes, she did.
remember
Yeah.
correctly. And she even said that people underestimate how revolutionary that is, just to wake up and make sure you've eaten your 3 meals, healthy meals, and be consistent with that. So that's really helped me. And burying myself in books, I read a lot of what I like to call tales of resilience. I pick certain people that have fought so many fights in their life in
Hmm.
any area, whether it's in the entertainment industry, sports, or whatever politics. I like to listen to stories like that because you get to hear how somebody was able to turn the corner when they also fell. So that also keeps me inspired. And I did what I like to call a social detox way back when as well, where I looked at my social circle to
Hmm.
see who actually added value in my life, right? Who actually called me out and what would help me with accountability in my life.
Hmm.
And I remember there was no one at the time. So I had to scratch. I had to start from scratch. So
Yeah.
that really helped because you become the people you surround with.
Absolutely.
That's another thing people forget. That's a
Yeah.
huge part of how you like handle yourself. If you surround yourself with somebody who has similar values, it helps you. But if they don't, then you
Right.
become that person without you knowing it.
Absolutely.
So
You are
yeah,
a product of your environment, right? And like you said,
yeah,
we underestimate how our social circles have a huge influence in our lives. Like
yeah,
if you're surrounded by negativity, guess what?
yeah.
It's gonna pull you down.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Hmm.
so I guess sorry, like so you're sticking to the basics, and then you did a whole detox, and then what were
Hmm.
some of the other things you built into your life and you continue to do today?
I cut down drinking and all the
Yeah.
drugs. I cut all of that down. 3 years sober. I um, I realized that I need at least 2 to 3 people in my life that I can have vulnerable conversations with without feeling any shame. Somebody who's not going to judge me, somebody who's going to see the good in me no matter what I've done, right? So I
Hmm.
remember like setting, but once I finished the detox, like I said, I set those people aside for myself. And also, obviously, therapy and being comfortable with therapy. I want to say that again, being comfortable with therapy, because I feel in my community, especially in the Black community, well, I speak for the Zimbabwean community. At least right now, things are changing, but there's still kind of this minor stigma that when you go to therapy, you're supposed to be suffering from some kind of mental, um, severe mental illness, which
Hmm.
is the case sometimes. But it creates this notion that you shouldn't go and talk to somebody to get that objective, that valuable objective piece of advice to help you build your life. So I want to say this again: there's nothing wrong with going to therapy.
Hmm.
You don't necessarily have to have been having suicidal thoughts just like I was for you to go to therapy. It's just so important to have somebody that isn't involved in your life to look at you as a canvas and pinpoint your black holes, right? So that you can
Hmm.
start fixing them.
Hmm.
So therapy definitely has helped me. And I think another thing that has helped me as well is just really, really practicing self accountability and understanding that it is my responsibility to keep this ship going.
Hmm.
I have, like, I can't give up. I've seen what the dark side looks like. So I just have to keep going. That
Hmm.
conversations with myself,
Yeah.
that's also a big thing. Talking
Yeah.
to myself.
Yeah.
That's what it's okay to talk to yourself.
Yes, yes, as long as you're having positive conversations, right?
you
It's
know?
when yeah, the negative self-talk doesn't help, but you're right. I think we underestimate the power of having those positive conversations with ourselves, because I think
Not,
we're our
yeah,
biggest critics, right?
yeah.
So no, I'm super happy to hear that, and a lot of the stuff you've mentioned is pretty much everyone that has been on this podcast has mentioned in terms of what's helped them.
Hmm.
um so I guess you're obviously continuing to do that work on yourself, but you're also now supporting others or being an activist. And what has that been like? How do do you feel like there's in the community there's people who are valuing the work you're doing and everything you're bringing, because you're almost like a role model for most, right, by speaking up and being an activist?
That's my hope. That's my hope, and that's the kind of legacy that I want to leave anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been definitely life changing because it gives me an opportunity to continue retelling my story, and the more I tell my story, the more I get more and more proud of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I just want to say thank you again for bringing me on this podcast because that's just yet another opportunity for me to continue telling that story. So it's been life changing because um, I've been learning how to just allow your truth to be what it is. Because I feel like I used to be someone that used to sugarcoat things a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Especially early before I started doing the work, pre 2018. So starting to do things like my podcast or signing up for speaking engagements has allowed me to learn that people will connect so much with you if you just say it as it is.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I mean? Just say it as it is. Be like, this is it. This is it, man. Take it or leave it. Are you comfortable? Cool. That's good. That's what
yeah.
I want you to feel like. I want you to be as comfortable. So that's been another thing that I've kind of realized as well. And um, I've also realized that it's. I think one of the other things too is realizing that it's not just about me too. I also have to remember that even as I do that, especially when you're walking in a room where you're trying to convince people about something. I'm learning that you have to also make spaces for their perceptions and their stories. Yes, you suffered, yes, you've gone through this, but that's a new thing that I'm learning, that even if I have a gospel to preach, I have to respect the people in the room as well. So
Mm-hmm.
those are some of the things that I've been finding and learning actually as I've
Yeah,
been doing the work.
so
Yeah.
like, can you explain that a little bit more? So when you are speaking to people in a room,
Yeah.
what does that look like in terms of respecting their own struggles? Because everyone's struggles different, right? So how are you giving them that safe space, where it's like understanding their struggles may be different?
It's a mixture of listening more and speaking more deliberately,
Yeah.
um, instead of listening to respond defensively, I'm listening to understand someone's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. Just literally 2 hours ago, I was presenting a speech that I'm hoping to end up showcasing at one of the Black History Month events at my work. So I was showcasing it to this couple, right? And I remember one of the things that they were saying is, because the speech itself is centered around coming out and the notion of it and the
Mm-hmm.
struggles that I, gone through with it. And I talk
Mm-hmm.
a lot about religion because it's a big part of
Yeah.
my of this involvement culture. So I remember they were giving me feedback and they were telling me something like, wait, when you're presenting this speech, you need to remember that you don't want to sound like you're attacking Christian principles in general. You want to make sure it's obvious that you're just attacking the way Christian principles are used by other people to spread hate.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you a specific example of what it looks like when I'm in a room and I'm interacting and I'm respecting that person's perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understanding that it's not discrediting my story, it's just how they see things, and that's okay. That's
Yeah,
how it's supposed to be.
of course.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I do know what you mean. It has been a challenge for myself as well. It's always easier to get defensive and feel like, well, what do you mean? Like, I disagree, and it's like it does take a lot of work to step out and be comfortable with your own perspective and in yourself, to be able to accept that there's multiple perspectives. And often when we do end up listening to people, that is when we can collaborate and come up with even better ideas, right? And I do talk about a lot of the stuff around where we typically have our own blinders on and our own biases, and being open and willing to listen makes a huge difference. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that's equally important in a lot of the work you're doing, as you've highlighted. I guess with the activism and the therapy and the self work, like, what's what's like in the future for you? Where are you planning on going with all of this, and what's your goal? And I know you mentioned that part of it is having this legacy of liberating others and encouraging others through your own story. But what does that look like in 5 to 10 years from now?
That's always a hard question, isn't it? What do you want your future to look like 5, 10 years from now? And when someone asks me that, usually I paint this picture of, I want to have my own TV show. I want to interview Trevor Noah.
Yeah.
I want I want to have released like 2 books.
Yeah.
And that's what I was gonna say. That's what I was actually gonna tell you. I was gonna say, hey, I want my podcast to be much bigger than it is. I want
Yeah.
to have hopefully a show. I want to hopefully have a book deal, doing tours and public speaking internationally. That's great. But now when I really think about it more intentionally, what I want in 5 to 10 years, I want to still have the same fight that I have right now. As long as I'm just as resilient as I am right now, then I know I'm going to be okay. So that's what I want my future to be. I want to be still out here. I want to be still going, falling, getting up, crying about it, getting up anyway,
Hmm.
cussing about it, putting one foot in front of the other anyway. That's what I want my future to be 5 to 10 years from now, 20, 30, or however long, I have the gift of life that I have, the duration of it all. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
No,
my
that's
answer this
that's
time.
beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think Mandela had a quote on that too, right? Like, judge me by not by my success, but by the amount of times I fell down and got back up again. I think I butchered
Hmm.
it, but it was something along those lines.
Yeah.
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 And that's the
Yeah.
whole
Yeah.
concept of resilience. So again, like um, and I'm amazed at everything you've talked about, and it's such a beautiful message that you have, even for the future. Um,
Hmm.
I guess one of the last questions I do have for you is for people that are struggling, whether it's you know if they want to come out and they don't know how because they're worried about the judgment or just the fear of coming out. What's what kind of message would you give them, like in terms of encouragement or support? Like, because we hear about kids or even adults struggling on a daily basis to accept who they are and uh, facing that identity and being able to tell their families and friends.
There's two things. The
Hmm.
first one, which I wish I had done, is taking the time to understand myself and fully accept me first before making a declaration. I just kind of threw it out there as I guess what I'm gay, deal with it. So I would suggest to anyone who's struggling with it right now, give yourself the time to fully own it yourself and realize that there's nothing wrong with you. It's
Hmm.
part of you, but not necessarily the whole of you, right? And work on developing that self-love language in a way that works for you. So that's number one. Take your time. And the other thing too is I would say you don't have to make such a huge public declaration because in this age of social media, especially celebrities, it's who can blame them? It's their culture. It's all about gimmicks and fanfare. You see someone coming out by posting this huge social media post, I went through this, I went through that. And I'm not discrediting their story or anything like that. It's great. They're doing it their own way. But I think that'll also put pressure on people that are in the closets to do it that way, and you don't have to. Not
Hmm.
the whole world necessarily needs to know about
Yeah.
like your identity, just as heterosexuals don't necessarily have to come out. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Did
Yeah.
you have like like no straight man or woman
Yeah.
was like, yes, I'm straight, you guys. Guess what? This is what nobody had to do that. So there's
No.
no obligation on you to make it so grand and public.
Hmm.
Do it your own way as long as it's the way of the truth.
Yeah.
That's what matters. So if it means your way of the truth is telling one or two people and then waiting years before you move on to the next, that's you.
Yeah.
That's your story. Just walk in it, fine. As long
Yeah.
as, like I said, you're making those small steps to walk in your truth, then do it that way. Um, I think that's the pretty much most of the advice that I would give to somebody who's struggling with coming out.
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
that makes
No, it does,
sense.
and I think that's amazing. And you're right. Like, it. for anyone, they can choose how they want to share their story, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
for anyone else to dictate. And
Mm-hmm.
it's owning the truth. And I think that's the biggest piece, is when you own that truth and you accept it, then you have this power, right? Because you are comfortable with who you are, and what
Mm-hmm.
anyone else thinks doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that, there's one more thing that I forgot to add here is don't be so focused on the reaction and how it's going to be perceived. Um, and be okay with the fact that when you do finally share your story, there's going to be a lot of anger, there's going to be a lot of rejection or neglect, whichever way you want to put it. There's going to be a lot of ugly words shared between people, between you and somebody that you loved and that you thought loved you dearly, but then now everything has switched because they now know this side of you. So I would say to that person, when it happens such that your grandmother or your mother or your sister or your cousin or your best friend of 30 years all of a sudden forsakes you when you tell him about yourself, don't take it personally, and also be respectful of the fact that that person has had this story in their head of who you are as a person, and you've just changed it, right? You've
Hmm.
just literally switched it up. They
Hmm.
had this perception of you for years, and then you've just kind of come on and say, "Oh, actually, oops, that's not what it is."
Yeah.
So you have to give them time to do what they need to do to either say, "Okay, I'm here for you," or "I don't want you in my life." That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Don't beat yourself down for that, because people have the right to choose how they want to respond to things, whether
Yeah.
it's hateful or not. So I
Yeah.
really would, especially for my community, because it's going to be a lot of get out of my house, get out of this community, leave. We don't want to see you. There's going to be a lot of that,
Hmm.
but just let it be and don't let it box you.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah. No, and again, that's amazing advice. And I think part of the fear is, but being shamed and
yeah.
being like cut off, right, from whether it's a family or being estranged by your friends. Like, I think, uh again, my story is nowhere near yours in terms of complexity or like the challenges, but I've also had fears of being myself or telling my family who I really am. I've had to
Mhm.
adopt this image of an East Indian boy in the culture,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I can attest to that. I guess there is that fear of being not accepted, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I think that's the challenge we need to come uh, face together and support each other through.
Yeah. People are entitled to their own version of their truth, just as you're entitled to your own. So, hey, if somebody decides to walk away from your life, maybe that's a big blessing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let
yeah,
go.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's
Let
different
go.
ways of looking at it, right? If they can't accept you for who you are, then they're probably best not being in your life. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
No, that's great. And I guess, as we come to an end, like for people that want to get a hold of you or just reach out to you, if anyone's got questions or they just want to chat and get to know you a bit more, what's the best way of finding you out there?
Instagram is definitely the best way. You can find me at Mandela's Disciple, MANDELASDISCIPLE, at Mandela's Disciple. I am starting to get into the Twitter again.
Yeah.
It's a slow incline. You can find me at Shade Activist, SHADE Activist, on Twitter. And I do have a podcast as well. It's called the Self Love Monologues. And I'm hoping that you will be showing up as one of my guests as well. But
Yeah.
yes, I recommend you look me up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts. Literally, if you search the phrase "the self-love monologues," I just pop up right at the top.
Yeah.
Join the conversations, because I just like you, I also sit down and listen to people's tales of resilience, what they've had to do, and I don't just focus on suicide or depression. I
Yeah.
had conversations about childhood sexual abuse, colorism, and generational trauma as a Black person. There's just so many things that I cover
Hmm.
in the podcast, not just that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
hit
No,
me
for sure.
up.
No, and
Yeah.
they're all very, very important topics. And as we know right now in the current world we're living in, like mental
Yeah.
health has become a huge, huge concern, and it's
Yeah.
something we need to be all focusing on and talking about. So, again, I commend you for all the work you're doing. And yeah, like I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your story and being vulnerable. Um, like, yeah, I'm super grateful to get to hear it firsthand. And everything you're doing is inspiring and very noble to be a voice for others. So I keep up the good work, and I'm glad we can be in touch and have these conversations.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for, bringing me into this space. Because, like I said, it gives me a chance to continue telling my story and gives me more confidence. And you're a great host,
No,
and I
thanks.
cannot wait to continue connecting with you. Because I don't know, I just get this vibe and feeling that you're just a very like well-grounded, kind, generous person. You can't fake that energy. So I
No,
appreciate you for inviting me into this space.
thank you. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.